Margaret Chen settled into her worn wooden cane, feeling the familiar ache in her knees as the crosstown bus lurched forward. At 78 years old, she'd learned to anticipate these discomforts. The afternoon light filtered through the scratched windows, casting soft patterns across the crowded aisle. A moment of reflection. She remembered when these buses were less crowded, when a seat was always available. Times had changed. The city had grown faster than its transit system, and now everyone seemed to be rushing somewhere important. Slowly, thoughtfully. Standing near the middle doors was a young woman, perhaps 22 or 23. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a canvas backpack that looked heavy with textbooks. Margaret noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the kind that comes from juggling too many responsibilities at once. The girl's name was Emily Patterson, though Margaret didn't know that yet. She was a nursing student at City General's teaching program, working 2 part-time jobs to cover tuition that her scholarship didn't quite stretch to meet. She'd been on her feet since 5 that morning, pulling a double shift at the coffee shop before her afternoon clinical rotation. A gentle transition. As the bus swayed around a corner, Margaret gripped her cane tighter. Her balance wasn't what it used to be. She'd taken this same route for 40 years, back when she worked as a seamstress in the garment district. Now she was heading to her weekly appointment at the community health center, the one luxury she allowed herself on her fixed income. With warmth, Emily noticed the elderly woman struggling to keep steady. Without hesitation, without even thinking about her own exhaustion, she stood from her seat. "Please," Emily said softly, gesturing to the vacant spot. "I'd feel much better if you sat down." Margaret looked up, surprised. Young people these days, they were always on their phones, lost in their own worlds. But this girl had kind eyes. "Are you certain, dear? You look tired yourself." A pause for emotion, Emily smiled, and it transformed her weary face. "I'm young. I can stand." "Please, I insist." Margaret lowered herself carefully into the seat, relief flooding through her joints. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're very kind." Slowly, naturally, they rode in comfortable silence for a few stops. Then Margaret spoke again, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language many decades ago. "Are you a student?" Emily nodded, holding on to the pole as the bus braked. "Yes, ma'am." "Nursing school." "Final year?" "Ah," Margaret said, her eyes brightening with understanding. "That's demanding work. My daughter-in-law was a nurse. She always said it taught her as much about kindness as it did about medicine. With careful pacing, they talked easily after that, the way strangers sometimes do when they recognize something familiar in each other. Emily learned that Margaret lived alone now, that her husband had passed 5 years ago, that her grandson checked on her weekly but worried too much. Margaret learned that Emily's mother had raised her alone, that money was tight but manageable, that she'd chosen nursing because her grandmother had been cared for by an extraordinary nurse in her final days. A meaningful pause. "You remind me of someone," Margaret said thoughtfully. "There's a gentleness about you. The world needs more of that." Emily felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. She'd been running on empty for so long that a simple compliment felt like water in a desert. Gently continuing, the bus reached Margaret's stop. As she stood carefully, she pressed a small card into Emily's hand. "This is my grandson's card," she said. "He runs a medical equipment company. They have a scholarship program for nursing students. I think you should call him." Emily started to protest, but Margaret squeezed her hand. "Please, let an old woman feel useful. Sometimes kindness needs to travel full circle, a thoughtful transition." 3 days passed before Emily gathered the courage to call the number on the card. She almost didn't. Pride can be a stubborn companion, even when you're struggling. The receptionist connected her to David Chen, Margaret's grandson. His voice was warm, professional, curious about why his grandmother had given out his card. With measured delivery, when Emily explained, David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can you come to my office tomorrow? I'd like to discuss something with you." Slowly building emotion, David Chen stood when Emily entered his office the next afternoon. He was in his early 40s, dressed in a casual suit with his grandmother's same kind eyes. The walls were covered with photos, medical facilities in developing countries, scholarship recipients, community health initiatives. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. "My grandmother called me that evening. She couldn't stop talking about the young woman who gave up her seat." A gentle pause. Emily felt self-conscious. It was nothing. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," David said simply. "You did," and it meant something to her. "Do you know my grandmother takes that bus route specifically because it goes past the building where she used to work? She's not going to appointments. She's remembering, staying connected to the life she built here." With emotional depth, he paused, looking out the window at the city below. "She came to this country with nothing, raised 3 children while working 12-hour days. She taught me that success isn't measured in what you accumulate, but in what you give away." David turned back to Emily. "Our scholarship program covers full tuition plus a living stipend, but that's not why I asked you here. We're launching a new initiative, a nursing fellowship program at underserved community clinics. It's a 2-year commitment after graduation, full salary benefits and loan forgiveness." Slowly letting it sink in, Emily's hands trembled slightly. I don't understand." "My grandmother has lived long enough to know that kindness is rare," David explained. "She wanted me to meet you because she saw something. Not just compassion, but the kind of person who acts on it without expectation. That's who we want in our program." A meaningful pause. He slid a folder across his desk. "Look it over. No pressure. But I hope you'll consider it. We need nurses who remember why they chose this path." Gently continuing, Emily opened the folder with shaking hands. The fellowship would cover everything: her remaining tuition, her mother's mounting medical bills, and provide enough to live on comfortably. More than that, it offered her the chance to work in exactly the kind of community medicine she'd dreamed about. "Why?" she whispered. "I just gave up a seat on a bus." With warmth and wisdom, David smiled. "My grandmother would say you gave more than that. You saw someone who needed help and you helped them, even though you were struggling yourself. That's not common. That's not ordinary. That's the kind of person who changes lives in ways that can't be measured." A thoughtful pause. "When I was building this company," he continued, "I forgot that for a while. I got caught up in growth metrics and market share. My grandmother reminded me what matters. She said, 'David, money is just energy. What matters is what you do with it.'" Slowly, with emotion, Emily thought about her mother, working double shifts to help with tuition. She thought about her grandmother's nurse, the one who'd held her hand and talked to her about flowers and music while administering treatments. She thought about Margaret on that bus, and how such a small act had spiraled into this moment. "I'd be honored," she said quietly. A gentle transition, 6 months later. Emily sat in Margaret's small apartment, sharing tea and stories. She'd finished her degree at the top of her class. The fellowship had begun, and she was working at a clinic 3 blocks from where Margaret lived, with tender emotion. "You know," Margaret said, adding honey to her tea with hands that trembled slightly, "I used to wonder what I was doing, taking that bus route, living in the past. But maybe the past and the future aren't as separate as we think." Emily nodded, understanding in a way she couldn't have before. "That day changed my life," slowly with wisdom. "No, dear," Margaret corrected gently. "Your kindness changed your life. I just helped it along. The world has a way of reflecting back what we put into it. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes we never see it. But it always comes back." A meaningful pause. Through the window, they could hear the distant rumble of the crosstown bus making its route through the city. Inside the small apartment, 2 women from different generations shared a moment of perfect understanding. The kindness that began with a simple gesture had traveled full circle, touching lives in ways neither could have predicted. And somewhere in the ordinary rhythm of the city, countless other small acts of grace were creating their own quiet miracles. A final gentle pause. Because that's how the world changes, not all at once. Not through grand gestures, but through simple moments of human connection. 1 bus seat at a time, softly, with warmth.